I'm going to let Mary start with her introduction. We'll go down the line from what's up there, but welcome to our presentation. And
thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm fun at Engage.
Yes.
All right. So how many of you, first of all, I'm Mary Larson, and I'm currently the portfolio manager for data platforms and insights in the products and projects core under Bobby Gray. So how many of you have not heard of the resource capacity dashboards? Oh, okay, a few. That's okay. Raise your hand. All right. How many of you have actually clicked on a link and gone to them and looked at them? Oh, okay. So after today, we're hoping that everybody can actually go and look at them. So today we're going to talk about dashing to decision making and how these dashboards started and how they ended up and what we're doing going forward. Oh, yeah.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Riley. I'm the Senior Director of Data and Analysis. So love doing all things data. See a lot of our data core folks here in the room. Thanks for coming, y'all. Excellent. So excited to be here today.
so I'm Warwick Pond, Executive Director in Enterprise Technology. See before Enterprise Technology was cool. So a lot of what you're going to see today is a big step into actually what has led to moving to Enterprise Technology. And we'd like to welcome our special guest, Terry Robertson.
Hi all. I am the Chief of Staff, Dr. Chris Howard. He's pretty impressive, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've had a chance to work with him and I'm really, really excited about this opportunity to get to know all of you. I'm a huge data consumer. I've been at ASU for about 13 years. For my first 12 years, I worked at the ASU Website Institute, which I know the big bites of data, that I know. Yeah, started off working for Lee Hartwell, who was one of ASU's Nobel laureates, and then within the executive director's office for the next several years. And then I've been working for Dr. Chris Howard since really the inception of the public enterprise, which was kind of introduced. And we're going to be sharing a little bit more about that. And but that's a little bit about me. Really pleased to be here. And if you have any follow-up questions, I'm happy to help.
All right, so we do want to talk about why this information matters and how it gets to decision. So Mary's going to start us off. So.
Okay, so I'm just going to give a little background of how we got started in gathering the data. So these dashboards are used to actually look at all the work in UTO. What's prioritized? Are you working on the right stuff? And that our stakeholders want. And it also shows if you have resources that are constrained or overworked. So that is kind of the point of the dashboards. And there's a few more things that you can see on them too as you go forward. So if you were listening to Lev's talk this morning, you heard him say culture of transparency. So this is kind of what came about when UTO 2.1 started 2 years ago. And we were told, guess what? Everybody gets to see what you're working on. Nobody gets to work in a little corner anymore. We get to see it. We want to see it somewhere. And so a few of us, well, first of all, in the products and projects core, we organized by portfolio. So all of the projects and projects were under there. And we each had our own area. So the first thing we did was identify what work we had in our portfolios. And well, how can we identify that and actually see it? Well, it needs to become data. And so we had a tool we were already using for many, many projects and products called Jira in the Atlassian suite. And priority was to get everything we work on in that tool, because then it becomes data that we can see. So the projects were already on their way to being visible. They had an identification ticket that showed what portfolio it was in, who was working on it, those kind of things. The products were in Jira, but did not have that identification ticket. So we put that on them. And then services, we came up with a schema for that. So they came along also, and service delivery organized into portfolios. So now we had a means of seeing where all of the work was. So we had the JIRA data for products and projects and services by portfolio. So the next step is we needed to figure out how to see who works on things and what their capacity was. So there was another tool in the Atlassian suite called Tempo. And in the past, we used Tempo mainly for time tracking and not very much for planning, but it had a planning feature. So there was a small group of us that did a proof of concept on the data platforms and insights portfolio. And so every team had to be input into Tempo. And so each of the work items, a product, a project, or a service, had a team, and that all was input into Tempo by the portfolio managers. And then each of those people have a percentage of what they're working on those specific items. So all of that was put into Tempo, and we were able to get a little bit of a look at capacity in Tempo, but definitely not what we needed. So now we had this data. We had everything visible in UTO, identified as a product, a project, or service. And we had all the teams in Tempo. So each person, where you were working, what you were working on, and how much you were working on. So we had all of that data, and then we were ready to build visualizations for it. And we'll get to that in a little bit, right? We're going to skip to Carrie.
So having all this data, we intended to have it help us make decisions with leadership across ASU. My part in this was to work with enterprise liaisons to identify what demands and what needs that they had that were shared amongst them. And so we worked with a very level, varied stakeholder group, which included what Dr. Crow calls WG Finance, WGF, you'll hear it referred to as well. The Office of the President, the Office of the CFO, Morgan Olson's office, COO, call himself the Office of CFO, but COO, Office of the CIO, Planning and Budgets, and then all the different enterprises we had to work with, right? And we captured demand, we captured what it is that, what new technologies they wanted to have worked on. Some of them weren't new, they just wanted the next iteration as well. And then we had to do some estimates of how much that would cost. How many resources would we need on that? And looking at all that information is just in a box. We had to look at it against the capacity of what we had available as well. And what that perhaps would cost us. Otherwise, we were just outsourcing all of that work. And this took multiple iterations, 7 iterations in total, 8 months, because how had we been working prior? Well, we were working prior by each individual enterprise and having relationships with those enterprises, capturing demand within those individual enterprises. But now we were asking them to come to the table together. And I can tell you, the details matter. I have that in caps because I had to sit down with Morgan Olson at least 4 times individually, one-on-one. And he knows the details of any spreadsheet you send, right? And he will question the assumptions, the formulas used, the data. And so being able to answer those questions in an intelligent way is really helpful when you have the data to back you up, right? Knowing that some of these are just estimates and assumptions. So again, this is in very much support of the ET model, enterprise, serving the enterprise, bringing these enterprises and the enterprise offices to the same table to discuss what are we going to work on, what are we going to commit to the next year. And you know, that conversation we had last year is going to happen again coming up in the next month, right? Now we have to ask, hey, for FY24, we have to start thinking about strategic investments for technology that are shared across these areas, right? And how do we move to a new model rather than my ask is the only ask that's most important, and who cares about the mission and objectives of these other enterprises? Thankfully, that's not how they're making decisions, working together. Go on to the next slide. So what were some of those projects being asked? Well, these are some examples, but I bulleted some of those examples as well, because you can see how these are what we are now referring to as pan-enterprise projects. Identity and access management is a project that is going to impact every single enterprise across ASU, all the offices and the enterprises themselves. Trusted learner network, digital equity, AI chatbot. These are all areas that each enterprise has an interest and they want to invest in, right? So further development. But what should they invest? What should the scope be? It took quite a long time to get that information. And this information kept changing. Because as you give one set of information, it brings up more questions. And so that more information was asked for, and we had to go get it. And so working with the portfolio owners and how and what information they got into the dashboard was extremely helpful in this process. And then we had to combine it with budget information, right? So what you're seeing here on this pie chart here is kind of the what was the UTO budget and now is the ET budget. And so if you look at the DevOps, 197 FTE, from our customer's perspective, 197 full-time staff, that's a lot of people. And you're telling me they don't have any capacity to do any work, right? So we had to justify what they were working on. And the capacity dashboards gave us this pie chart, which it's still on the dashboard, probably not these numbers anymore. But that enabled us to say, hey, they're working. It's not as though they're not committed. They are committed to product operations, new projects, and then product enhancements. And then the question came, well, what product enhancements? It's eating 56% of their capacity. What is that? Well, we were able to, again, go to the dashboard and export or look at the backlogs and see where that demand was coming from, right? Where the demand of product enhancement was coming from. Because they have to own what they're asking of us to do. And so this actually made sense because academic enterprise, they don't have technology, a technology group. They don't have technologies. We support them 100%. So for them to almost own 40% of that demand made perfect sense. But they wanted to see what they were asking, what their enterprises were asking that impacted our capacity. And we were able to show them that. Now they can disagree and say, oh, you shouldn't work on this, then you shouldn't work on this. And what a wonderful conversation to have, because how many in this room want to work on anything not valuable? Nobody. And that's the point of making sure that we have that transparency so that we can help make better decisions. And then again, tie it into the finances. So if you look at what we were able to summarize within the dashboard itself, we estimate for the next quarter what our capacity is going to be. So we only have a window based on your guesses of your availability and capacity of what that capacity is for one quarter. So we had to extrapolate that. What could that and should that look like for a whole year, perhaps? And what we came up with was, the demand, if we were to meet all of the demand, you're asking us to do $20.6 million worth of work. Our availability today is 1.8. Now, we didn't estimate that out into FY 24-25, which was asked, by the way. All right. But the reason is it would be just a complete falsehood, right? The way that this institution pivots, right? We wouldn't actually be able to guess or estimate that out. Based on risks that we want to avoid, that if we worked on this project prevents our ability to grow and scale. So that's why we want to work on the project. So you can see, this is actually interesting. Some of the demand was mostly coming for, we want to grow and scale, but we have less optimal performance in our current operations. So you have a mix of operational projects to fix existing and a mix of new because they want to grow and scale. And so sharing this message, we had to fill this gap. And for some, looking at an Excel, that looks fine, and the numbers tell the story on a table. If you go to the next slide, we tried to share this in graphical representations too. Here's the gap. Here's our availability. Right now, you can disagree with our availability, and we're happy to have those conversations, because what we're saying is that's the 56% that's dedicated, right? We only have 1.8 million available, but you can change that. If you decide you don't want to work on other existing product enhancements that we're committed to, or if we don't work on new projects, you're welcome to change that. We can flex that up, but you have to tell us to stop doing this. And that's the conversation we want to have, right? And so the result, well, we first summarized everything, right? If you want everything, there was 42 initiatives. It's going to cost you 20.5 million. We also did an estimate of annualized operations and maintenance. And I do still get questions of, well, what is operations and maintenance? It's, once we complete a project, someone has to maintain it, right? And so showing and being transparent of the burden of build as well, that is an ongoing investment. Yeah, laugh it up. And then FY23, we broke down, hey, this is the investment expenses that are needed to work on these projects, and these are the resources needed. So the total amount of resources, 4.6 million, that's actually. And we broke down those investments from that list of what was in flight. So about 34% of what they were asking was already in flight, right? But look at that, 56% was new. Okay, so this is sharing the story. You all have an insatiable appetite for new and exciting technologies, but you have to be responsible for what you're asking of us, because our capacity limits, right? And if you don't like that limit, either make some decisions or invest more, right? Okay, so 20.5 million was for the whole kit and caboodle. That is excluding the new HCM, which was estimated like 57 million. And then we projected, I should say, what did this all result in? It resulted in $6 million of new funds. $6 million of new funds with a contingency as well, added to that as well. But if you heard Lev talk about our operation budget, our 55 million is about salaries, right? Another 55 million, 55 million is working on these projects. So that 6 million is about 12% addition onto our budget. That's not small and that's not insignificant. That is an investment made based on us being able to share the story with the data that you all provided within the capacity. And I'm going to turn it to Carrie to kind of discuss why that's important from the perspective of the ASU public enterprise.
Thanks, Mark. So $250 million. $250 million is the university's annual spend on technology, of which enterprise technologies receives about half. So think if you, as an executive vice president at Arizona State University, were responsible for helping to steward those kind of dollars. ASU has an annual operating budget of $4.2 billion with a B. So I just want to set a little bit of context to help you further recognize how important the data, the capacity analysis, all the kinds of things that you help report is so incredibly vitally important to us. So really, realize we have 140,795 students who began this fall semester. Over 800 degree programs, you guys also know this, over 33,000 degree program or degrees awarded this past semester. 16 colleges and schools, 27,000 employees, 5,800 faculty members. What is the underlying theme in all this? It's technology. It's technology. It's your input. And it's incredibly valuable. You know, Sherlock Holmes. I love when he said, it's a capital mistake to theorize before you have data. And so you can read for yourself, but the data that is put forward helps President Crow, but essentially it's the 5 executive vice presidents. So you see here, this little triangle, it is the provost, it's Nancy Gonzalez, and it's the leader of the Knowledge Enterprise, Sally Morton, and the leader of the Learning Prize, Maria Aguiano, and it is Dr. Morgan Olson and Chris Howard. So those are our 5 executive vice presidents, and they're responsible for making a lot of decisions that don't just pertain to the 250 million, but also pertain to the other kinds of funding that can come to enterprise technologies, including the 6 million that was apportioned earlier this year. And they're so thrilled and excited by everything that's going on, but also moving at that scale and scope. We recognize that that takes a lot of effort and time, and these don't always work perfectly. But your input is valuable for so many reasons. It really is getting more real-time updates that help enable this kind of shared decision-making. The lab will be working very closely with the APPs on that, and especially with Dr. Howard. These kind of shared opportunities. So we're also really interested in thinking, well, what are those data points and decisions that impact not just the academic enterprise, who's a huge consumer of your work, but also what could we leverage of that technology into the learning enterprise? Or how, I mean, for 12 years, I spent 12 years in the knowledge enterprise using a lot of, you know, big data, complex kind of big computing and quantum computing at the Biodesign Institute. So the insights that are provided by enterprise technology are so important. It helps the EVPs to really understand the effort, the limitations of the technology. What are the constraints that they should be aware of? You're our technical experts. We're relying on you to help provide and enable and empower them to make decisions that this university needs to take us into the next decades. So that is key. And then scenario planning. We want to know what kinds of things should we be aware of? Is this technology going to be available and useful a few years from now? Are there elements that we should consider more deeply? That's going to be really important. And what things would we choose? Are there just expressions of choice that we should be aware of? It really helps in prioritization. You can imagine that those things that are deemed to have most value or are going to be elevated in priority. Or those things also, sometimes there will be things that will just be unique to the academic enterprise or one of them. But then there are those projects, and Morgan and I have been working almost on the daily for months on this, to be thinking about what kinds of things will weave across all the enterprises and that we need to pay particular attention to, because there could be unintended consequences that we need to be thinking about right now. And then finally, what are the needs, opportunities, other kinds of things for which the enterprise technology needs more funding? So that's not always the question, or that's not always the answer, to have more money. I mean, we all need it, but sometimes it might be leveraging, increasing the scope of a project to incorporate something else, or to be thinking, but wait, this will impact our learners, our lifelong learners in the learning enterprise as well. And what should we be thinking about relative to what they're doing? So I just wanted to be sure that you all had a great understanding for why and how that information is used. I kind of think about data being a summary of thousands and thousands of stories, right? Do you ever visualize data in that way? It really represents a story. you might see these, you know, for me, working for Josh LeBaire and the Center for Personalized Medicine at Center for Personalized Diagnostics at the Biodesign Institute. And the COVID testing, how many has taken a devil's drop off COVID saliva-based COVID test? So that's biodesign's work. I'm intimately acquainted with it. But the data, the HIPAA, you know, we've got HIPAA projects kind of standing in the way right now. All that testing, all that medical data, all that, you know, we've tested like 1.4 million people within the state of Arizona. ASU is responsible for protecting all that data. So these solutions, they are about the stories that we tell. And we want to be sure that this data is meaningful. So I want to be sure that the executive vice presidents are also sharing those stories with you, that it's just not a one-way feed, that you're providing this amazing data and capacity analyses so we can help inform some of these dashboards, but also what do you need to do to keep you inspired and informed about your work? It's so vitally important, but Work and I working together and with these liaisons who care deeply about what you're doing and giving you the tools and support you need to be successful. But to be sure that you really understand what the provost and the academic enterprise is trying to represent in their work and sharing those stories back to you so you also can see the impact of all the good work that you're doing. Thank you.
Thanks, Carrie. And we're going to do a deeper dive into the actual dashboards that Elizabeth and team created. So I'll hand it off to Elizabeth.
All right, back to the dashboards. If you haven't yet scanned the QR code, please do so now. I saw a few folks come in a little bit later, so just wanted to make sure that we get your attendance in here. Because we have a more technical audience here with our ET colleagues, I wanted to take a moment to talk about the sources of some key information that drive the dashboard. So I think you all heard the key takeaway, all of the data, all of the information that you all put into Tempo, into JIRA, resulted in $6 million additional dollars for UTO that we did not have before, a 12% increase. So what you all have done is extremely, extremely important. And so for those of you who might be a little bit newer to the dashboards and to some of the underlying information that feeds into there, I wanted to go through some of this points so that you understand what information is pulling from where. So from JIRA, we get that project, product, or service name. We get that portfolio and your portfolio leader, and we get the enterprise. So the enterprise, or the enterprises that are impacted by the work that you're doing within that project, product, or service, that is available on that JIRA ticket. And then we join based on that project, product, or service key into Tempo. Tempo is where we get the percent of each person's time for each project, product, or service by quarter. So that's typically your portfolio managers that are inputting that data into Tempo. So we're going to go into the dashboards in a minute, but if at any point you don't see yourself in these dashboards, or you don't see all your work in these dashboards, it's working with the leaders, the owners of your projects, products, or services, and that person working with your portfolio manager. So that's that stream of communication if at any point you have any questions about your data. And then we join into the HR data to get your chapter or your department. Also, because we have a more technical audience, we couldn't let this pass without a nice flow chart to show how data is flowing from our source systems into our data lake, and then our Redshift enterprise data warehouse, and then into Tableau, where we create our dashboards. All right, so there's several views of the dashboards that we're going to explore today. We're going to see if this link works. There we go. I'm never going to be able to find this person. All right, so one trick to these dashboards that always gets me is this hamburger menu. If you want to see the different dashboards, you have to physically click on this hamburger menu. So then you can see all the dashboards that are available to you. It's all pained by this. We're going to start with our portfolio view. If you want this to go away, you physically click on the hamburger menu again. This is the thing we get the most questions about by far. All right, so in our portfolio view, this portfolio view is showing the number of projects, products, or services within each portfolio. At the top of each of the dashboards, you can filter by quarter. So for this particular quarter, these are the number of projects, products, or services within each portfolio. And you can see for our academic personnel experience, we've got eight projects or products in the red. So what does that mean? That there's one or more people that are above 98% in allocation. So it could be one person that's a bottleneck for all 8 of these. And if you wanted to click in and see what might that look like, so you can click in and see who is assigned in each area. You can see for this particular project, product, or service, what is the percent allocation? And then you can see the overall allocation for each individual. So that's our portfolio view. Remember, if you want more details, just kind of click around on stuff and you might get to a page that gets you additional details. So back to our hamburger menu, down to the chapter view. This is the other more popular view. So we were looking at the number of projects, products, or service in our portfolio view. Here we're looking at humans. So the number of people who are in each of these chapters. And this is showing the number of people who are allocated per chapter at 75% or below via what's in tempo for that person, at 76 to 95%, and then at greater than 95%. So just to give kind of a rough order of magnitude of sort of what buckets folks are fitting into in terms of their allocation. This data is only as good as the data that you put into it. So appreciate all the time, effort, and energy that I'm sure every single person in this room has put into getting this data into JIRA, into Tempo, and really appreciate your continued work in getting this information in here so we can make this available. There's another view that I'm going to show you because when I show people this view, it answers the other most common questions that folks have. But of course, you all have access to these dashboards. We'll make sure you all have the link to these dashboards. You all have access to them today. So this detail and search view. We get a lot of questions like, well, I just want to see my stuff, or I just want to see this one project. And so this detail and search view is less pretty looking, but it gets you to that brass tacks information where you can use these filters at the top to just focus in on one project or one human or one portfolio and see everything that's there. So I show you that because this tends to answer when folks have questions and I show folks this dashboard, they say, oh, I can get what I want. I'm good now. So just remember that this is there.
if I change chapters?
If you change chapters, the dashboard will auto update. So, so the dashboard has, within 24 hours, the latest and greatest information about what chapter it is that you are in. So if your work is still allocated to you in tempo, everything will update here to your new chapter.
So work is cycle first.
Yeah, so Todd made a great clarification. The work isn't assigned to a chapter, it's assigned to a person, and that person is part of a chapter. All right, now we're gonna see if I can get the presentation back. What do I click?
Yeah, the first tab.
Thank you.
If I can find it.
All right, so raise your hands if you feel like you have a better understanding than when you walked in here of what decisions these dashboards are helping folks to make. Do you have a better idea of what decisions? Okay, that's great.
I will never complain when I have to put in data for everybody in my portfolio.
doing
Yeah. That's $6 million.
So I'm from facilities management. Hi, everyone. I'm here because I cause a lot of problems over there, in order to push technology. So I'm curious to what extent the exercise of developing this can be shared with other units that could use this type of hybrid.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we're happy to show you how we did this, work with you on where your data is now, how it's possible your data is in a place today that might not be Jira, maybe it's ServiceNow, maybe it's something else. But we're happy to work with you and try to give you some tips and tricks on how you might be able to get into this format. And also, Mary is our expert in how she set up Jira and Tempo and tied everything together. So we can also go through that too, if the team's open to a new process, or what I assume might be a new process, depending on what you're working with.
And the data going into Tempo.
Yeah, Todd?
You do.
The data going into Tempo, that's coming from the updates.
That's right. Yeah, so each portfolio manager manages things a little bit differently, but the way that Mary manages our portfolio is she puts all of our projects and products into a Google sheet, and then we go in and put the humans that are working on each of those and the percentage, and then Mary transfers all that information, thank you, Mary, into Tempo.
They have a lot.
Yeah.
Is there a question? Here?
Yeah, you talk a lot about the value of the data is only as good as the data that goes into it.
Yep.
Where is the accountability for the accuracy of the data in our organization?
Yeah, that's a great question.
It's a great question. Hand it to me. Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, we pull this data, and if you're over, we explicitly know when you're going to be let go, right?
If someone says I'm at 150% and they're really just doing 5
Correct.
hours
So
work,
this is where we actually lean into our values, and one of the first values is trust in our teams. And so it is trusting in each other, right? And the accountability is that when I say details matter, I'm telling you, Morgan is looking at exactly every single line. And he has asked me about specific individuals as well, right? Because of the data that's in there. And sometimes it's erroneous, and I go follow up. I follow up with Mary, or I follow up with that exact person. I say, hey, is this really actually reality, right? So those feedback loops will continue to occur, but it is that, I really appreciate the question, because it's that trust that if we break it, it's decisions aren't going to be made off of it, right?
no $6 million.
That's right.
No $6 million. Well, I also, you heard it from Carrie, and now that she's gone, I'll say it, right? No, I'm just kidding. But 250 million, right? Total spend within the organization for technology alone. Okay, the ask was 20 million. Within our budget, our $4.2 billion budget, was there $20 million to spend on technology? In addition, yes, there was. So in answer, in this process, money was left on the table, right? Now, some of that was because we culled some of the projects, but the better we get at this, the more decisions we can make, and the more value not only our teams, but the customers will get out of it as well. So I think it will just iterate it and make it better and better. But great question though, because it is reliant on each of us, to be honest.
So beyond each person though, each work item, product, project, service has an owner. They're responsible for the team. They're responsible for getting the work done. They should know if somebody's working 80 hours a week on something. So we rely on the project managers, the product managers, and the service owners to give us, to talk to their teams, ask somebody, how much are you working on this? Well, I'm working 50%. Okay, put you down for 50%. And then those owners of that work, then they relay it to the portfolio managers. So it's a trust, but it's also working together. And those owners of those work items should know what their team members are doing because they're responsible for that.
And I just want to call out 50% has been to imply 20 hours a week
Yes.
of work. If you're really working 20 hours a week on this, that's great. That's reflect that. But don't just throw that like, oh, I think I'm spending 50% of my time, when in reality you also have, times you're in emails, when you're in meetings that are product team rewrite or whatever. Like, be accurate about that 50%, call out 50%, and don't just.
And don't worry if you're not at 100% on the dashboard, because we do know other things come into play with your work.
In fact, ideally, you shouldn't be.
Ideally, you should not. You really should not be at 100%. And that is where those levels come in, where we are saying that if you're at 75%, that's okay. That's really full-time work because you've got other things you're doing. You've got meetings, you've got town halls you go to, you've got professional development training,
Yeah.
you've got this. So that's okay. That's why it's not bad to be less. And people aren't going to look at it and go, oh my gosh, that person's only working 20%. And the other thing is there is some work that doesn't fall under that if you're at certain levels, so that you're not going to be at 100%. I would ask each of you to go to the dashboards and look at your percentages though. Use that search for the person and look and see if you're right. And if you're not right, then that's your opportunity to go to your project manager, your product manager, your service owner and say, hey, this isn't right for me. Then they can fix it. They can relay it to the portfolio managers and it then becomes accurate data on the dashboards. So yes, it's only as good as the data.
Yeah, I want to add one other piece to that, right? So it is only as good as the data. There's the opposite side of that. If we get investment, there's going to be expectation on that.
Yes.
Right. So we have to move on that investment. We have to spend that money. And so there are our quarterly reviews where we're looking at our capacity every quarter with this leadership and our spend down. So we're being held accountable to it on that end, right? And then, I don't know about any of your parents or grandparents, but how many of you, you go visit your parents and they're like, hey, I have this problem with my computer, right? It's a true stereotype that if you're in IT, you can fix anything, right? And I can just tell you right now, from our customer's perspective, that is how they view us, right? We're all engineers, we're all developers. I don't understand. Just move these people working on this stuff, right? So helping them understand that there are different roles and that we can't just pivot and get 10 people working on, a project that they don't have the skill set in. We could, but it's going to take longer. And, I think I even told Dr. Olson, like, my dear good sir, like, you do not want me coding anything at this point, right? So those are the conversations that they need to understand, because, when you look at at ET, we're a big department, right? A very, very big department, like just in the numbers, 687 people, right? So, you know, there's a desire for some accountability to that large investment. But it's also our responsibility to actually share, like, where does that actually go? Because it's not all for net new things, right? And if you build a net new thing, we have to operate it afterwards.
How do you plan or currently share that information to the worker bees so that there is trust in how you prioritize projects to correct for?
The information of decisions that are made. Oh my goodness. Well, Greg, no, I'm just teasing. But this morning, it's a relevant question because this morning I was talking to a team and one of their projects is on this list of investments, right? That we made capacity decisions and we made investment decisions based on the capacity of that team. And they were saying, well, they're kind of stalling, I'll be honest. The project is stalled, not the individual stalling. And they said, well, it'd be nice if we had some money so we can get some contractors, you know. You have money, what are you talking about? And it wasn't shared, right? So diffusing this information, it has been a challenge, right? And so, you know, I sent a message out to, you know, our WGX leadership saying, hey, these things, this spreadsheet of investments are shared with you to disseminate. So if you don't have it, ask them for it, or just ping me and I'll don't ping me individually. No, find a Slack channel and ping me, right? So
DMs are bad.
yeah.
Has anyone in data collection ever tried to collect data based on, how do I word this? Let's say someone comes to a group with the project like you're describing and you don't have the skill set. Has anyone ever tried to collect data tied to what people can do versus that?
Yeah. So, well, yeah, but so we do have some of those projects and we estimate on the cost of what that would be to pay for externally, right? But then we do some estimates of if we brought them in. But we have like rates, I guess, that we rely on. Yeah.
Yeah, so I know a lot of that comes down to the chapters and folks really understanding what skill sets are within what chapters and working in a chapter, but the chapter needs to say, hey, this kind of looks like the skill set that I need for that project. Work with the chapter lead to see if that indeed is, and if not, if they don't have the resources in-house, being able to hire out. All right,
Yeah, we're at lunch. We're keeping you guys. Thank you so much.